At birth, we already carry the blueprint of a powerful mind, about 100 billion neurons. Shortly after birth, we enter what neuroscientists call the age of neuronal burst, a phase of explosive brain development when the brain forms trillions of new connections, far more than it will eventually keep. Around the onset of puberty, we're left with about 150 trillion connections. There are at least two things that the development of the brain reveals. First, the speed of your mental abilities is related to the robustness of your brain's wiring, which depends largely on your genes. In other words, our genes define the raw basis of our mental capacities. Second, and probably most important, your mental structure is not fully matured until you reach your 40s, 50s, or even 60s. In other words, your brain continues to develop, but more so during your early years. This means that the structure of the brain is more malleable when we are kids, which is why, for instance, reading to kids before the age of 4 improves IQ. I'll discuss further IQ later in this episode by about 4 to 6 points and continues to develop verbal skills after that age. And administering supplements like fatty acids to pregnant women, breastfeeding women, and infants increases IQ by 3.5 to 6.5 points. Sometimes the environment change is even more dramatic. A study that launched in the early 90s amid the birth chaos in Romania called the English and Romania Adoptee Project followed babies from Romanian orphanages, many of whom had experienced severe early deprivation. The study showed increases in mean IQ, average IQ from 60 to 109 points. That's a 59 points increase. An almost complete reversal of deprivation consequences for orphans who came to the United Kingdom before 6 months of age. But those who came to the United Kingdom after 6 months of age showed on average continuing mental deficits, which means that although they might have improved, the mental ability, for instance, never caught up with the average mental ability of the typical UK kid. All this to say that the brain is more amenable to change earlier in life. Now, as said before, the interesting and empowering news is that the brain maturation does not complete until later age, especially when you remain active both intellectually and physically. And that'll be the focus of this episode, the 6th of the series on the science of learning. And I also think this should be your focus, since you cannot really change the genes you receive from your parents, nor can you change your childhood. And I'm hoping that you're not 70 years old when you're watching this. So to justify and discuss the powerful idea of the brain's maturation throughout life and what it means, I'll focus on 3 elements: myelination, the re-encoding of actions from persistent practice, and neurogenesis. First, myelination. A part of the maturation that continues until later in life is the myelination of the connections between nerve cells. Myelination is the process by which a substance called myelin, that is in the brain, thickens around the connections between nerve cells in layers like the plastic coating on a lamp cord. The more effort into improving one's abilities in a specific skill, the higher the myelination level, the coating of the connections between nerve cells for that specific skill. And the more coating, the easier the skill appears. For instance, increases in piano practice, for example, have shown correlated increases in the myelination of nerve fibers associated with finger movements and the cognitive processes that are involved in making music changes that do not appear in non-musicians. This means that there is a real physical change in the brain that corresponds to effort, dynamic testing in a spaced and varied way. This also means that believing that you can achieve learning and improvement goals is not just you being optimistic, it's a reflection of what's actually happening in your brain when you put a lot of efforts. And that's what psychologist Carol Dweck refers to as the growth mindset. Second, there's a re-encoding of actions from persistent practice in a different part of the brain. Research shows that when we repeat something to the point of mastery of habit, the steps of the action or skill are recorded in a different part of the brain, different from the path where our conscious actions are directed from. It's a part of the brain called the basal ganglia that controls actions like eye movement. This is exactly what's at play when you type on your computer keyboard without looking at the keys, or when you speak a language fluently. It's almost sure that with enough interest, one can learn almost anything, make the steps involved in achieving that thing encoded such that the execution of the action is automatic and unconscious. Some people think they'll never be good at some of their interests because of their raw cognitive intelligence as measured by IQ. Maybe they're right, but if you're one of them, before jumping to conclusions, please listen to these facts about IQ. Before the facts, so what is IQ? IQ, intelligence quotient, is a measure in the Western world of an individual's cognitive abilities. Fluid, that's their working fluid intelligence on one side, and their crystallized or accumulated knowledge on the other side. Compared to others of the same age, it has flaws, but it is a fairly reliable measure. It's almost by definition cultural in the sense that the content is always in relationship to a language, a set of valued knowledge valued by certain people. But let's set that aside and take it for what it says it measures, since most people take it for what it says it measures. First fact about it is that its distribution is what statisticians call normal, such that if you had an IQ of 100, your general cognitive ability will correspond to the average level of intelligence as measured by the IQ test. This means that on one extreme there are gifted individuals with high cognitive ability, about 15%, 2 to 3 in 20 people, and that there are individuals on the other extreme side of the spectrum with difficulties with elementary tasks. So that's about also roughly 15%, 2 to 3 in 20 people. But that also means that the vast majority are around average, meaning that the remaining 67%, so that's 15 or 16 in 20 people, are in the average range, which is most people, enough to contribute meaningfully to society, the way society is organized, at least in the Western world. The second fact is that intellectual ability as measured by IQ tests account for about 25%, the reference is in the description, of the variance in how well people do in school, and about 15% of how much people make in terms of money. So taken together, these two facts mean that you're very likely smart enough to do things that sparkle your interests, because you're more likely to be in the middle to high part of the distribution, especially if you can watch this. And secondly, being smart enough is not the only or main thing you'll need to fare up well in life. there's a good 75% part in how well you do in school that is due to other things than your cognitive ability as measured by your IQ. There is a good 85% part of how much money you make in your life that's due to other things other than your cognitive ability as measured by IQ. Those things include hard work, knowing the science of learning, what you're learning here, knowing how to collaborate with people, self-efficacy. There's so many more things that you'll need. All things that you can work on and grow throughout your life. So the idea here is that as we grow up, whatever our natural abilities, we have a significant margin for improvement. And for what it's worth, I personally hold that when I see an adult who seems deeply gifted, it's generally about what they do than what they were born with. Third element to support the idea of the brain's maturation throughout time, neurogenesis. Research has also observed a phenomenon called neurogenesis, which is the generation of new neurons in the hippocampus, the seat of memory, in the anticipation and during some specific types of learning. And that reinforces the idea of the brain being malleable, that the power to increase your abilities lies largely within your own control. That'll be it for this episode. The next discusses the use of mnemonic devices, which are shortcuts that can be used in combination with the learning approach I described so far. At the end of this episode, you probably feel like you understood very well. How can you be sure? You can download the illustration of the video in the description along with the PDF file summarizing it.